welcome to the Insurance Buzz. This is your host, Michael Weaver. We have your co-host, Courtney Weaver, with us, and a special guest, Mr. David Neagle. David, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely, David. So I want to jump right into this. So you're in the personal development space, but I would love, so obviously we caught up right before this, but I would love to hear the story again. Share a little bit about how you got into the personal development space.
Okay. After my parents got divorced when I was around 13, me and my brother were kind of left to our own devices. They weren't around very much, and we were kind of raising ourselves, which led to me quitting high school when I was 17 years old. I had just had enough. It wasn't working for me, and I decided to just quit and go to work, and there had to be another way that was going to work. So I just worked. That's all I did. I knew how to work. And I decided to get married relatively young, and I got married, and we had a couple of kids right away. And I found out very quickly that I did not have the ability to handle this responsibility, especially from the financial perspective. So we were going through this cycle of overspending, which got us into a little bit of trouble, like young people sometimes do. Mm-hmm. And as we started to go through this process, I lost a job, then I had to go find another job, but I didn't have any skill set. I could drive a truck and I could drive a forklift. So I got this job driving a forklift, and it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough money. We were trying to figure out how to make it. And in that process, one morning my car was repossessed, right? We had a car repossessed. I was shocked that it was repossessed because I went out to go to work in the car, and it was gone. And I came in and I asked my wife, I said, "Where's the car?" She says, "It's outside the front door." I said, "It's not." She said, "It is. I parked it there last night when I went to the grocery store." We went out there. It was gone. I called the police. I'm like, "Somebody stole my car." And they said, "What's your name?" And I tell him my name, and he goes, "Sir, nobody stole your car. It was repossessed for lack of payment." I didn't realize we hadn't even paid the car bill in 3 months, right? They completely took it. Tried to get out of our lease in our apartment. They wouldn't do it. We had to leave in the middle of the night. We had to find a self-moving thing and leave. We had to go move into a neighborhood that was a very undesirable neighborhood to live in, but it was the only place that we could go. We're on food stamps at this point. And I didn't know how to, I recognized like, okay, I did this. I don't have the skills to get a job, to get anything that's going to pay anymore. I tried. I applied everywhere. I did all that stuff. And it was like, you don't have any skills, man. What do you expect to be paid, right? So I'm working all the overtime that I can. I'm working 6.5 days a week at this food distributor. And things are just getting worse. And part of the problem was that I was getting worse. The more I was losing, the more humiliated I felt. Mm-hmm. We were having problems at home, and I didn't know how to change it. So I was not feeling good about myself. I wasn't feeling good about myself as a husband or a father. It's not where I wanted to be, but I didn't know how to get out. So now I recognize I'm the problem, but I don't know how to change it. So I'm spending, I would go, when I would go on break at work, like lunch break, I would sit down with a pad of paper, a pen, and a calculator and see if I could figure out different ways to make more money. How could I get out of this situation by making more money? Maybe there's something I can do on the side. Like one time, I got somebody to loan me a few bucks, and I bought a used snowplow. We lived in Chicago because this was a real thing. My wife would call me and say, because if there was, I remember it was 2 inches of snow, you would go plow. I could make more money plowing than I could on overtime. So I would give up the overtime, and I would drive 60 miles to go home to plow the snow, and then hardly get any sleep and have to go back to work to do it all over. Like, it was not a winning strategy. So I'm getting more and more reprimanded at work for just not cutting it. I'm not doing quality work. And I'm working on a dock. Like, it doesn't take much, right? You just got to put forth an effort. But I was very frustrated, and I started blaming everybody else. Like, it's everybody else's fault that I'm in this position. So when I would get corrected at work, I would yell back at them, right? It's like, you guys are this and that or whatever. And it was disturbing. It really was. I was on a bad trek. So one night, it was really cold. We were, like I said, it was in Chicago. It was brutally cold outside. I worked nights, and I was exhausted. I got in trouble twice before I even started my shift for shoddy work again. And I'm in this trailer and I just start crying. I had this just emotional overwhelm and I just start bawling my eyes out. And I said a prayer. I'm like, God, if there's a God there, if you're real, please show me something, because I don't know what to do. I'm like, I'll do anything. Just show me some direction. Give me some direction, because I can't take this anymore. And a voice in my head said, David, change your attitude. Now, usually when I tell this story, I tell people, it actually sounded like it was outside of me. It sounded like somebody was in the trailer with me. And I kind of looked around for a minute, like, what was that? And that's what it was. It didn't say anything else. I never heard it again. That's what it was. So it made such an impact in that moment. I thought there must be something to this. I was kind of fighting this internal dialogue, though, that I was having, because the dialogue kept saying, there's no way that anything can change by you changing your attitude. That's silly. That's crazy. And I said, no, I'm going to try this for a year and see if it brings any kind of change whatsoever. So I thought, well, what is an attitude? I don't know. But I know that my whole life I've been hearing the same thing in a way, because when I was a student in school, I wasn't a really good student. So they would call my parents in, for a parent-teacher conference, and they would say, listen, David's a pretty bright guy, but his attitude around doing the schoolwork is awful. Mm-hmm. I would go home and then I would get disciplined. And the discipline was basically this: go to your room and study, and you're going to stay there until your next report card. You need to change your attitude. But they never taught me how to change it. They never taught me how to study. They didn't realize that I probably was ADHD, right? My mind was all over the place. I was highly creative, but I couldn't get myself to focus on anything, right? I mean, that's in the 70s. So nothing ever changed. So I decided, okay, if I'm going to figure this out, who do I think has a better attitude than me? Well, the guy that started the company that I worked for, he didn't have any education either, but he built it was the largest food importer in the country. And he started it in his garage. That was the story that we were all told. And I thought, well, there must be something that I could pick up off this guy. What did he do? And I thought, okay, first of all, he must have loved what he did, because I hated that. I hated what I was doing. I would have talked myself every day into just going to work. I didn't like it so much. So I thought, okay, he loves what he does. That's one thing. What else? He must have done an amazing job in order to build this enormous company. And I thought, I really don't. I have to admit to myself, I'm not doing a good job, and I know that I'm not doing a good job, but I really never had anybody show me how to do my best. Like how to be responsible for what I was doing, how to better it, how to look at it, how to evaluate what you're doing, how to change things that aren't working. Nobody ever showed me that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to learn how to do my best. And the third thing was something that really kind of surprised me. Even later on, after I began to understand what I had changed, my whole life I grew up that successful people were not good people. They were crooked, or they were jerks, and they treated people bad, and they were taking from the poor, and this whole narrative. And the owner of the company had really done something amazing with his warehouse. He had it automated. It was like state of the art at the time. Other companies would come in, CEOs from other companies, and they would walk through to see what he had done. The owner of our company would never walk past an employee without acknowledging them in some way. And that stood out to me for the simple reason that I was taught that they're not nice people. But I'm looking at this guy, and he always acknowledges everybody. He's kind to people. And I thought, okay, I'm not treating people well because I'm so angry. So I am going to start treating everybody with respect. It doesn't matter who they are. I'm going to start treating with respect. So 3 things that I changed in my attitude. I'm going to act like I love what I do. I'm going to do every job to the best of my ability. And I'm going to treat every person I come in contact with complete respect. The idea was do it for a year, see what happens. I started it immediately. And 30 days later, my income tripled. I went from $20,000 a year to $62,000 a year. And it completely blew the doors off of my mind as far as what was possible or how this even happened to begin with. I would literally sit down with my paycheck, and I would look at my name next to that number. And it was like those two things shouldn't even go together. I was making more money than anybody in my family had made up to that point in time. And everybody was saying the same thing to me. David, you got lucky. Don't screw this up like you've screwed up everything else, right? And I would say, I'm not so sure it's luck. I think I did something. No, trust me, you got lucky, right? This only happens like once in a lifetime. Don't blow this. I didn't believe it. I'm like, I don't think that's how the universe operates, right? I don't believe in luck. I did something. I just don't know what I did. Mm-hmm. So I started going to the library and getting books, and I was like getting biographies and autobiographies. I don't think that there was a self-help section at that time, and I didn't even know where to look, even if there was, because that word was never used, right? So I just kept trying to find things. I found Tony Robbins' personal power tapes on late night television, which is a whole other story. But I started finding little bits and pieces. I got rid of the music in my car because I used to listen to music like every other person does. And I started listening to books on cassette tape or lectures or biographies, Tony Robbins' personal power stuff. And little by little, I started putting the pieces together as to what I actually did. But when I first started doing this, well, I'll give you, for instance, one of the very first books that I got was Think and Grow Rich. And somebody gave me that book. And I started reading it, and it made no sense to me because I had no reference to anything that he was talking about in the book. I'm like, what is this? Right? What is this subconscious mind and all that? Like, that's not what I'm looking for. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I was looking for something that made sense that didn't make sense. So over a period of time, I started progressing, and I was advancing in this new company that I was working with. I started off as a truck driver. And 7 years later, when I left to start my own business, I was in charge of expanding that company across the country. So it was a very significant change, and it just kept getting better and better and better and better. In 1996, I met my mentor, who was Bob Proctor. I worked with him for 7 years. We had a company together. We did all kinds of things together. Like it was the greatest period of growth in my life working with that guy. And we were friends, and he taught me everything. So from there, what I did was I started my own business in 1999, and I just never looked back. And that brings me to today.
That is, that's amazing.
I mean, there's so many. Bob Proctor, like that, like Tony Robbins and Bob Proctor, and you talk about how there wasn't a self-help section, and now it's so prevalent everywhere. I think
nobody even knew who Bob Proctor was back then, right? People knew Tony Robbins kinda because of the infomercial thing, but like if you asked any person, any 100 people walking down the street, they couldn't tell you who Bob was, because Bob basically worked within corporations. So if you weren't part of the corporate world, especially like sales, he did a tremendous amount of work with like Metropolitan Life and Prudential of America. Those things. He was also big in the MLM field. Those people knew who he was, but outside of that, nobody had ever heard of the guy.
Yeah, I love Bob Proctor, so you are speaking my language. I think something that I've had to kind of navigate, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, is now we have almost so much information that it's hard to kind of pick and choose which path to take. So it sounds like you had moments where you were following intuition, God, the universe, whatever. What did that feel like for you? How did you know you're like, okay, this is the next step to take?
Well, it was a very strange experience because on one hand, it was the most exhilarating thing that I had ever experienced. On the other hand, this is God's truth, there were days where I questioned myself. Am I actually losing it? Mm-hmm. Because the differences in what I was learning to do based on the way that I was raised the contrast was so stark, it almost appeared like these things are crazy. The things that he's telling you to do is absolutely nuts, right? Compared to the way that you're raised to middle class or working class. The values are different. When I first started coaching with him, he said to me, and the coaching payment was significant. I had to charge that. I didn't have the money to do it. And I was not working at the time in a place where I could earn extra. Mm-hmm. So I was on a fixed income. So I pay all this money, I get it to start coaching with him, and he says to me, what do you want? And I said, I want to be a millionaire. And he said, okay, the deal is this. you do exactly what I tell you. If you don't do what I tell you, I'm not going to work with you. And he's like, I'll just let you go. You said, tell me once you're not going to do it, I'm done. It's over. You have to do exactly what I tell you to do. And I'm like, dude, I'll do anything. You just tell me what it is, I will do it, right? There's no question. And the first thing he tells me to do is to start flying first class. I have to go to every one of his seminars in the United States. I have to fly first class to get there, and I have to ride in a limousine back and forth from the airport to the hotel. And I was like, are you serious? And he saw this I mean, I can imagine the blood probably just ran out of my face when he said that. And he said to me, what's wrong? Because I wasn't going to tell him I wasn't going to do it, but I didn't know what to say.
Yeah, you're like, this is the first thing I can't back out now.
Right. And he said, what's wrong? And I said, don't you think you should teach me how to earn it first before I start doing that? And he said, how did he put it? He said, if you don't learn how to treat yourself like a millionaire, you'll never become one.
Ah.
And I heard what he was saying, but it was like, that was when I really got scared, because I didn't know how I was going to pay for anything, and everything had to be charged. But it was the most brilliant thing that he ever did with me, was starting me off that way, because he did two things. He got me to see my own value and self-worth, right? Like, you're worth being at the front of that plane. But he's like, you're the only one that can make the decision to do that. He's like, he said, when you step into this world, you no longer need permission from anybody else to promote yourself to the next level. That's your responsibility. And I, of course, had never heard that before either. But subconsciously, that's what most people are waiting for. They want somebody else to give them permission to say, hey, you're good enough. Go ahead. You can do this now. And the next thing about it was that it gave me a reason to earn more money. And I didn't have a reason, and I didn't know that that was part of the deal. Because most people, I do a training that's called Financial Set Point. It's our subconscious financial set point, right? You usually receive it as a child, but it's not based on any logical idea. It's based on this idea. Most people are raised with this. You don't need that. What do you need that for? Right? So the set point's based on the perception of your need versus actually strategizing, coming out, making a logical goal to hit a certain amount of money because you have a reason for that money in your life. It's like, I don't need that, right? You don't need to spend extra money on that. You don't need it. My whole life I heard that. And most people do, right? Your parents tell you don't need that, or we don't need that, or it's all about whether you need it or not. And that need is based on perception, because even if you're raised middle class, somebody's perception of what they need could be different than the guy next door. Now, it's not that drastic, but it's drastic at that level because everybody's on a fixed income, right? And that's where you get, like keeping up with the Joneses type language. So it significantly changed. Now I needed to make more money to be able to pay for these things that I was actually doing. There was a real reason behind it. Now, this is something that's fascinating. Most people are raised with the need thing, but they're also raised with something else, and that's being responsible, right? Were you raised with the idea of being responsible? Did your parents tell you should be responsible? Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's fascinating about this is, unless you were raised in a home where, like, maybe they were addicts, or you were homeless or something like that, which this would not work for. But the average person that's raised middle class has enough responsibility installed into their mind where they won't let themselves go too far in the negative direction, right? Not that they won't miss bills or not pay them on time or whatever, but they usually won't let the bottom drop out where they end up devastated and homeless. You just don't see it. That responsibility kicks in to a degree where they go from being afraid about not having enough to where there's a sense of urgency where it has to happen, right? It's like something says in their mind, we can't go any lower than this. This has to actually happen. And then all of a sudden you start manifesting money, right? It might be, I found $50 in my coat from last winter, or grandma sent me a check for my birthday, or I got an unexpected tax refund. But the truth is that you're now creating that opportunity to come in. It has to happen. You're making it happen. You just don't understand how you're doing it. But it's It's a significant lesson to learn, because if you create the need to go further, you're already subconsciously programmed to meet that need. And I learned this in my coaching pretty early on, that I could actually help a person raise their income faster if I would base it off of that need idea, versus if I said, hey, set a big audacious goal to go for yourself. And then as soon as it came down to the earning money part, they would be completely stuck. They wouldn't make the sales. They would procrastinate. They would find every reason they weren't ready enough yet. Well, there was no need to make the money. So that idea that Bob gave me was a total game changer in the industry space.
This reminds me of some of the old school like sales guys I talk to. They're like, yeah, our managers would just be like, go out, buy yourself that BMW, buy yourself that sports car, because then we have a need to be able. We have to go out and sell to be able to make the payment. We have to be able to sell to live the lifestyle we want to live. That's
And they're trained to do that, by the way. Like, I worked for Metropolitan Life for 2 years, from 88 to 90, right during the savings and loan crisis. That's why I ended up getting out. I wasn't making enough money. But I was originally kind of trying to go down that road. But they were trained to get you to spend it as fast as you were making it, because it would be the only thing to get you to the next level. Because typically, here's what happens with salesperson. They know how much they have to make to pay their bills. They produce to that point, and then their urgency shuts down, right? And they'll say it's all kinds of outside things that are influencing it, but it isn't. It's an internal shift that hasn't been made yet. They don't need anymore, so they don't produce anymore.
I love this because you're raising the financial barometer, like the temperature of what your ceiling is. I feel like there's a temperature of like, what's your threshold of what you can earn or what you believe that you can earn. And this is an easy way to bump it up. Yes. Now, what's your thought process on, I think there's a lot of self-worth that comes into who am I to do this, or there's a lot of money mindset that you have to work through. Did you have to go through really reprogramming your worth to become the kind of person that could make that money? Or was it as simple like, I'm just going to embody this and action's going to get me to the next level?
Okay, so check this out. I had to do that to be able to keep the money. I didn't have to do that to be able to earn it. Because the deal with working with this subconscious need is that you're using the programming that you already have to help you actually earn more money. It taps into your inner motivation for doing so, because we're working with programs that you were given as a kid. I find that if I was to just take the average individual, I could take two people exactly the same and start working with them. With one person, I increase their need and get them to $1 million that way. Versus the person that I try to work on their self-esteem with, it doesn't work. Most of the time it doesn't work, because they just don't see themselves as that person. So not only do they not see themselves, but if you do the traditional thing like say affirmations, create a vision board, do all those kinds of things, their subconscious mind's going, that's not who you are.
Yeah.
They're battling that every single day. So if we sneak around that problem and actually getting them make the money, all of a sudden the value internally starts to shift, because they can't deny what they're actually doing. But the key is if they don't make a shift from that point on, they will go through a process of winning it and losing it, winning it and losing it their whole life. So once you get them there, the next thing I do is get them into the self-worth, really working on that self-worth, but you've cracked the door open so that they can receive the message. I mean, here's something that Proctor taught me. One day he said to me, David, because I had a problem, I didn't know how to change it. And he was talking to me. We were in a hotel, and he said, your subconscious mind is insidious as hell. He said, you have got to figure out a way to trick it. If you take it head on, you'll never win. It's just too perfectly designed, right? You're never going to battle it to win it. Either you'll lose because of exhaustion or temptation or lack of willpower or whatever. You've got to trick it and figure out a way to get it to work with you, right? So it's actually working. It believes that it's doing the right thing. You have to lift yourself above the idea of where you see yourself right now. Something has to happen. Now, when we're kids, the fascinating thing is that our mind is open to that, right? A kid doesn't have a negative program that says you're not good enough. It takes years to build that up. in a child's mind. And then they start having that verifiable experience outside of themselves with their peer group and in school. And of course, now on social media, which is just destroying people's minds to no end. Children, from the perspective of what they're actually taking in and how their mind is being developed. But if you do it, so it's like this. Adults have to change their mind. Kids have to make up their mind, right? That's it. As a child doesn't have to change anything. And generally, they'll believe whatever you tell them, right? Think about Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, right? Think about all the fables that we tell kids. And at a certain age, they believe that they're 100% true.
Yeah.
At those ages, if you implant the right ideas into their psychology, they will never have those problems in their lifetime.
Wow.
Wow. And this is, so we're in the process of starting to have a family. Like that's something that's very important to us. And this is something that we talk about a lot. So as adults, we're working on reprogramming, but what would you say some things are that you can program into children to really get them into that abundance, open mindset?
Great question. A couple of things. First of all, they're going to watch what you do more than they listen to what you say. So they're going to pay attention to how you behave with money, first of all, right? If they see that the amount of money that you have is controlling the decisions that you make, you'll never get them to believe in abundance because you're living in lack, right? So all decisions must be made from a value perspective of, is this something that we want for our life? Is this going to better our life? Is this something that we want to do? Because once we make the decision, we will always find the money to do those things. So then it's about letting them experience life based on cause and effect, right? I really believe in the 7 universal laws as far as not only training ourselves how to think, but also for kids. But you have to let them experience the cause and effect themselves. That comes right from the point of making a decision all the way through experiencing a consequence, even if it's the wrong decision. Let them make the wrong decisions, but let them experience the cause and effect of the wrong decision so that they understand it, and then they also have the impotence to actually make a change. It's interesting because my first 2 kids were born before I knew any of this stuff. And then I didn't have my next 2 till 10 years later when I was already steeped in this. And there was a significant difference in the fundamental idea of what they believed as they started to become adults. Now, I was able to really change it with my older kids, but it took a lot of time to really work with them in order to change those ideas. But with the younger ones, it's never, they don't know any other world other than manifesting what you want is as easy as pie. Making money is easy. Like there's no issue with it at all. And they're out there doing the things that they love to do.
Man.
That is incredible.
This is so good because, and I guess, so my question would be, so for those individuals that, look, you try to practice an abundance mindset and you do these things, you do the I am exercises, you do the vision boards, you do the things that you're supposed to do, but that scarcity keeps sneaking up. How do you continue to try and push that scarcity down or even get rid of that scarcity mindset?
You don't. You don't address it in any way whatsoever. You just let it be there. Okay? It's kind of like fear. First of all, fear is not a bad thing. Fear is a good thing. If we didn't have the ability to experience fear, we'd probably kill ourselves in a week or 2 because we would make a stupid decision that would probably prove fatal. So, but the way that we deal with it is this. When fear pops up for us, the idea is to recognize that all of a sudden I'm experiencing fear, but then we're supposed to bring our intellect into the matter and say, is this something that I actually need to be afraid of? If so, why and what do I have to do? So that we have the ability to think through what the problem is. So we're only born with 2 fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Every other fear is learned, right? And most fears are neurotic fears. We actually got them because somebody else had the fear. We didn't actually experience something that caused us to actually be afraid. So when we start to do that, we can understand that fear only has power if we acknowledge it, right? Either if I go with it or try to push against it, it's going to win. Let it be there. Just let the fear be there and do the thing that you're supposed to do. Now, with the mindset that you're asking, it's the exact same way, right? Your subconscious mind, it has only two functions: to keep you alive to the age where you can procreate so that we move the gene pool forward. That's all it's really designed to do. So when it says, when that lack mindset starts to come up, it thinks it's protecting you because that was the paradigm, and the programming, the pattern that you developed as a kid. What do? You recognize it. Now I recognize it. Okay, it's there. I'm not going to do anything with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a higher value system that I'm going to use my intellect to consciously follow. And that is the truth, being able to really understand the truth, that we live in an abundant universe, that money is very easy to make, that acquiring and manifesting whatever resources you need is very easy to do. It's always available. The law of polarity says you cannot have a need or a desire for anything without the thing actually being there, right? Because the law of polarity operates with everything in the universe. Everything has an opposite, and it's equal and opposite. So if I'm experiencing a lack of something, the abundance of it must be there at the same time. This is what I didn't know when I actually tripled my income. The opportunity for me to triple my income had been around me for 2 years, but I didn't see it as an opportunity because I was so negative in my mindset. I thought it was something that I didn't want anything to do with, which is a whole nother story. I won't go down that road, but I looked at it without any, it wasn't like I was even conscious of going, do I want this or not? It was just, I judged it, and that's the way that it was. So I didn't see it as an opportunity. When I changed my attitude, I all of a sudden saw this in a different light because I was now aware that I was looking for something different. So when I got approached with the idea of going to work for this other company, I actually, instead of judging it, I said, wait a second, what is this? And then I found out that I could make that much more money instantaneously just by walking away from this one and walking into that company. And it came with its own set of risks and paradigms and stuff that I had to work through to be able to do that. So if I hold the truth that everything that I need is already here, that the universe is abundant, that there's a couple of things about success that I really drill into the people that I work with. And I work mostly with business people. And the idea is this: you were born to be a success. Success is behind the impetus of all life, whether it's human beings or nature. Otherwise, it wouldn't even have a purpose, right? If the success of life was a chancy thing, life would cease to exist. It just wouldn't do it. It really needs to be the construct in which everything is motivated to move toward. So you were born to be a success. I don't care who you are. And success is easy. We've been given a con game, right? That success is difficult. It is not difficult. The only thing that's difficult is disciplining yourself to get yourself to do the things that you need to do. Because you're overcoming programming and you're literally changing your mind, your emotions, your behavior. If you can do that, it's cause and effect. It's simple cause and effect. If you do this thing, you'll get this result. It doesn't need to take years. It doesn't need to be difficult. Now, some ideas that people have for businesses obviously need to be worked out over time. But success in and of itself is not hard. It's easy. And making money is one of the easiest things a person will ever do once they understand what it is that they're actually doing.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Like more. Love this so much. So there's a lot of like law of attraction, manifesting. What's your belief when it comes to law of attraction and then the law of action of like really getting into moving towards what you want? Because I see that kind of getting a little bit misconstrued on where, I'm just going to think about it or I'll believe or I'll manifest and then it just shows up.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of information left out in those ideas, right? The law of attraction really is not a law at all. It's based on the law of vibration, which is a law of the universe. Everything vibrates and everything has an individual frequency in which it vibrates on. I mean, that is absolute science. When you're actively using the law of attraction, what you're doing is you're changing what you're thinking about. Because if I'm thinking like everything's terrible, my life sucks, I'm on a frequency of thought. which will resonate with other frequencies of thought of the same idea. And that's what I'll see out in the universe, and that's what I'll attract to me. That's also the knowledge that I'll be infiltrating my mind with, because our mind is both a sending and a receiving station. If we're thinking on a frequency, we will harmonize with that frequency, and then we can tap into the knowledge on that frequency. So if I raise my thought process, I'm changing that frequency. And I'm now put myself on the frequency of getting the questions answered that I'm asking internally, right? Receiving different thought ideas, which then cause different actions, which then cause us to experience manifesting different people and opportunities in our life, because it's changing the way that we experience our world. It's not like we're magnetized to a person on the opposite side of the world, and because we're thinking something, they're going to come and all of a sudden we're going to have an opportunity. There's a lot of process to it, but it starts with changing your thought. I like to explain it like a regular old-time radio, right? Whatever room you're in, there's probably 30, 40 radio stations playing at the same time. You can't hear them because you don't have an object that can actually make sense of the frequency. But if you have a radio and you dial it into whatever the frequency the rock station is, or the hip-hop station, or the news, or the weather, or sports, or religious, you're instantly going to hear it. It's already in the room. You can't hear it because you're not listening on that frequency. It's the same thing with the answers about what you need, what you want, what you're going to create in your life. When you start thinking on that frequency, it'll all of a sudden start coming to you, usually as a mental picture first, but it answers it every time. There's an answer to every question. There's no such thing as like a redundant question. There's an answer to everything, but you have to maintain that, right? So that's where something like affirmations come in. That's where like a goal card comes in. You write down the statement of what you want or the question of what you want, and you keep your mind on that thought process all the time. And then you start receiving the information that's on that frequency. And yes, you can train yourself to do it automatically so that you don't have to constantly tell yourself to do it over and over again. But in the beginning, there's a lot of truth to that, because the story that's going on, so there's three voices in our head. We've got our voice, our internal voice. We've got what I call the voices of others. That is the representation of all the people that were in your childhood, right? Speaking back to you through memory, right? And then we've got the voice of fear. So the question is, what voice am I hearing in my head? Well, generally, when you're living your life and you haven't actually done anything to change, you're listening. Your voice is kind of repeating the voice of the people that raised you. You hear mom's voice in your head, dad's voice in your head, whoever was a significant adult, of authority in your life. It just constantly repeats. The idea is to shut those voices off and then start commanding your own voice, right? So you gain authority over those other voices and you listen to your own internal voice.
Is there a specific language that you can tell, like you can discern between those three voices? Are there certain like verbiage or vernacular that like shoulds or limiting beliefs, or how would you start to discern like which voice is which?
A little bit. So first of all, fear always tells you what not to do. Okay. There's a spiritual practice that says fear tells you what not to do, spirit tells you what to do. Also, you could look at it as far as like your intuition, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to test it. You have to learn the language, which means you have to be willing to make a mistake, okay? So fear tells you what not to do. Spirit tells you what to do. Your higher voice is really going to point you in the right direction. The other voices are usually conversational. They're trying to get you to engage in a conversation. That's how you know it's somebody else's voice. Right? And you'll be able, if you would just stop and listen to the voice for the moment and go, whose voice is that? You'll recognize it immediately. Like, oh, that's my mother. She always says that. Or my father always said that. Or my priest always said that. Like, you'll be able to identify whose voice that is. If you actually stop and realize, oh, this is somebody else's voice. Whose voice is it that I'm listening to? And if you just practice that, you'll get to know all three of them really, really easy.
Wow.
Yeah, this is...
That is incredible. So you're working with business owners, entrepreneurs. What do you think, like, some of the first things that you're noticing, maybe limiting beliefs or some programs that they can rewire? How do you get them kind of down this path?
Well, one of the things that we do with people is we have them look at something called their core wound. So here's something that's fascinating, and I'm still studying this myself. When was shame and guilt introduced into human society? Like, how far back does this go, and how was it created? Because it's not part of us as a human being. It's taught to us. You don't see a little baby have any shame and guilt about anything, right? But we correct people all the time using shame and guilt. You should be ashamed of yourself. Don't do that. You're going to embarrass me, right? You should feel bad about what you did to your sister. Like, we introduce it. Once we introduce it, it takes on a mind of its own. So part of the problem is that once shame and guilt is introduced into the mind, it begins to associate the attention or your lack of needs that you're getting from other people as something having to do with your fault. Like, I'm not a good person, people don't like me, people don't love me. However that dialogue begins to start, you're interpreting mom and dad based on this voice that you're hearing inside of your head that basically you're not good enough, right? So when we're little kids, our subconscious mind is not concerned with whether or not we're happy or rich or how good of a relationship we have. It's only concerned with getting the needs met that must be met from mom and dad, because without them, you'll die. But what people don't realize is that usually, unless you had very aware parents, when they raise you to an adult, in your mind, in your subconscious mind, they're still the authority figure. If you don't consciously go in and make yourself the authority of your own mind, you're actually listening and waiting for permission or having a dialogue based on what you do, based on what they told you. And it's really significant, because unless you break it, you'll never change it. It'll always be somebody else telling you what to do. It'll regulate your decision making. However, if you become aware of it and you actually make that change yourself and you say, I am the authority over my own life. I am okay with making mistakes. Shame will tell you you can't make mistakes. Guilt will tell you you can't make mistakes. But the only way human beings actually learn and move forward is through the process of making mistakes and learning. But you think about when you were a kid. When was it okay to make mistakes? Probably never.
No, it wasn't.
Probably never. But see, and I don't want to be like conspiracy around this, but it's undeniable that everywhere in the world where the masses are controlled and kept in kind of their station or life, this is the process in which they believe, right? They can't make mistakes. They have to get it perfect. They feel shame and guilt about the things that they do. They don't have enough self-esteem to take charge of their own life. They struggle to death with sex and intimacy. They won't say what they want. One of the hardest things is, what do you want? Ask a person, what do you really want? They will struggle with that question. You'll scramble their mind like an egg when you ask that, because they've never been taught that it's okay to have what they want. So that's where we start with people. Getting them to understand that you've got a paradigm that is causing you to stay where you are. It's complex, but we simplify it for them so that they understand how it operates. And then we teach them how to make decisions from a different paradigm of truth, which is, I am worth it. I am a great person. I deserve to be the best that I can be. And then we show them how to make decisions based on those ideas versus like, I'm not enough or I'm not lovable, which will always infiltrate your decision-making process. And in business, it's horrific. It's horrific. People will go into business for themselves coming from a middle-class lifestyle, and they build it as if they are on a limited income because they don't realize that there's an abundance. They don't know how to tap into that to make more money. So then they get into hiring and they're like, I can't afford to hire that person. I've got to make more money. It's like, no, you don't. You need to make the decision to hire the person so that you have the need to make the money. Right? And you need to find the best A player that you possibly can, or you're building a company full of B players, right? But the value system is completely different. So those are the places that we start with people.
Gosh dang. That is so good. So good, David. So I feel like we could keep this conversation going and going, but we want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, I'm over here like analyzing my childhood wounds now because there's so many people, myself included, how many I'm like processing, how much of my day to day am I operating out of that wound to try to keep me safe, or what voice am I like using as my decision maker? Like, this is incredibly fantastic. Like I could go on for hours.
Oh, this is great. So, David, if somebody did want to reach out to you, what's the easiest way to do that? Maybe tell people a little bit about your company. That'd be great.
Yeah. So basically, what we do is we work with business people on both mindset and strategy. We come at it from both places. My CEO is also my partner in the business, and she's excellent at like marketing and team building and doing all of the strategic stuff, and I'm amazing at the mindset. So we tackle it from both places. The website is davidneagle.com. It's Neagle, davidneagle.com. And if you want to get a kind of a taste of what we do, go to the Successful Mind podcast. We're usually top ranking in business podcasts. We're on every podcast channel there is, I believe. And you can listen to Steph, my CEO, and I talk about these problems. You know, the podcast it's morphed a lot over the years, just trying to find out what our niche was in the podcast world. And now Steph and I do them together, where we talk about the problems that business people face every single day from a different perspective, so that they can learn. I mean, there's no investment in that at all. We just give that away, right? Like, here's giving back. Learn, do something with it, make a change. And then if you really want to work with us, just let us know, and we'll have a conversation with you.
I love that. And we'll drop all of that in the show notes too, so you can directly click and follow David and his company, Life Is Now. This has been incredibly valuable. Now I'm going to start Googling and going, how do we work together? Because this is, I think that growth and really where we're at right now as a society, really working on our mindset, reprogramming. There's a sense of accountability that you've talked about a lot, which I appreciate. And I think that that's really important, just having the awareness and accountability for how your life progresses moving forward. So.
Yeah.
This has been great, David. Really, you've got me thinking about some of my limiting beliefs. I'm like, well, man, what's going on? So seriously, thank you so much for your time today. This was amazing.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. It was an honor to be here.
Absolutely. So for all of those listening, if you liked today's episode, please go in, give us a 5-star review. Go check out the Successful Mind podcast as well. And as you all know, time is the most valuable and important asset that we all have. Appreciate you all spending it with us today. Go out and make it great.